This is a video on using VMware Fusion, which is a Class 2 hypervisor product from VMware on a Macintosh, on OS X to run another operating system or multiple operating systems. In this case, you'll see my window here is my library virtual machines. We're going to show you how to use it, how to set up a virtual machine, and what some of the advantages are. So first things first, you got to get the product VMware Fusion. We will go to VMware.com, and on this page you will find a login. And if you click on login or highlight login and select My VMware, if you haven't created yourself a password yet, hold on, let me put something there. If you haven't created yourself a username and password on this page, you'd want to go ahead and click register and get a free account. I already have one, so I will log into it. The importance of creating an account here is all your keys are licensed here and your product downloads are available here as well. So rather than show you the license keys, I'm just going to show you the product downloads. Typically what you'll go is to products A through Z, and you will look for Fusion. And when you find Fusion, you will click on View Download Components. You click on View Download Components, and you can click on, you see this is just a link to show you the different versions. I can actually click Go to Downloads. And finally, I'm at a Download Now page. There are two flavors of this when you buy it. There's Fusion and then there's Fusion Pro. For most people, Fusion is absolutely 100% what you need. For a few of us that teach and do piloting of networking architecture things where you need more layers and more capability, the Pro is a little bit more money, but you can get it and you can do things like building multiple networks inside your machine. So it's pretty straightforward. You download it, you install it, you apply your key, and from there, you are going to be left with a window like this, and you will have nothing in the left-hand side. So let me explain to you what VMware Fusion does. VMware Fusion itself is emulated hardware. That means it's going to pretend to be hardware to whatever operating system you install. It itself does not come with operating systems. It is only the emulator. So when we say we want to build a new computer or a new virtual machine, we have to install the operating system. So to demo that today, I have two files in the background. Typically in today's world, we don't use real DVDs anymore, but you can see here I have a Windows 10 version of the DVD for Windows Pro. I also have a disk here of Office 2013. And I'm going to show you, you typically don't want to be carrying CDs around with you, you just carry the ISOs. So we'll come back to those in a minute. The first thing I'm going to do is build the hardware like you would in the real world if you were building your own computer. So I'm going to select Add. This actually might pop up this wizard the very first time you install it. So if it does, don't be alarmed. So I go New, make a new virtual machine. You'll get this installation method window. Typically there are lots of different options here. The one I use almost all the time is create a custom virtual machine. So you're going to select that. And then in here, you're going to choose your operating system. Now, to a lot of people that haven't done this before, it seems like, why am I choosing an operating system? Is it going to install it for me? And the answer is, no, it's not. There is no OS install included with VMware. Why do we have to then pick the operating system? In this place, I'm going to choose Windows 10, a 64-bit version. Why do I have to do that? Because the VMware Fusion will then emulate hardware that is compatible with Windows 10, so that when you go to install Windows 10, you won't be hunting down any drivers. All the drivers are already built into the Windows 10 CD or DVD. So what VMware did is they went to the Windows 10 DVD and said, oh, look, it's got an Intel E1000 NIC card driver built into Windows. So wouldn't it be nice we'll emulate having that as a NIC card so the end user won't have to go and find drivers. 10 years ago, when we were installing new machines, we always had to go hunt driver files down to install operating systems. This makes it real nice. So if I tell it Windows 10, it's going to build a processor, memory, NIC card, storage drivers, controller drivers, sound cards, everything that's compatible with Windows 10. So it's real important you make the correct selection here The most common error if you do not is your OS will blue screen or purple screen of death or kernel panic or whatever. So we're going to select Windows 10 since it's what we're installing. I'll hit continue. And then it's going to make a hard drive. Now it's going to make this hard drive 60 gig, which is pretty big considering I'm not putting any files on there. But I'm going to show you a way that you don't have to store your documents or your projects or whatever you're working on, your Excel spreadsheets, on this virtual machine. You can actually store them on your Mac and access them from the virtual machine so that we don't have to have 2 copies of stuff and take twice as much space. So we're going to show you how to share that. So I'm going to leave this at 60, understanding that this is going to do something called thin provisioning, meaning it'll make the drive capable of growing up to 60 gigs, but it will only take up as much space on my Mac that I actually stick data in there. So if I put a 10 gig operating system and 2 gigs of data, instead of taking 60 gigs up, it'll only take 12. So it's important to note that. So I'm going to go continue. And basically it picked for this machine based on my hardware that it's going to give me 2 gigs of memory, 60 gig drive. It's going to share networking with my Mac, and I'll show you that. And it's got some other devices. So what I'm going to do, typically I don't click Finish because then it tries to run and install. I usually click Customize. So after I click Customize, before I can customize it, the first thing it's going to need to do is save this virtual machine. So what does that mean? Well, the virtual machines are typically saved on your documents in a folder called, let me sort alphabetically here, Virtual Machines. And then you give it, whatever name you want. I'm going to call this Utility Windows 10. That way I know it's just a standard average Windows 10 machine. And that file will save wherever you put it. Typically you want to keep these all in a place that you keep your virtual machines. One thing to note, this folder that it's keeping them under, in my folder under my documents and virtual machines, I actually tell my automated backup, which is in my case CrashPlan, not to back this folder up because look at the size of these files. You might want to back them up, but I'm really more interested in my data, so I've actually told it to exclude this file. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and now it's saved that machine, and it's brought up the customize window because that's what I told it I want to do. So I'm going to go through each of these items here. General is basically where you name it. You can change the OS here. Typically, you should never have to do that. You can see the amount of disk space it's currently using, only 7 megs, but if you do something like snapshotting and such, and it can actually reclaim space and reduce the size of this, you'll see it in yellow down here. And then you just push this button and it cleans up the virtual machine and you reclaim that space. Sharing, this is kind of cool. So this is where I want to use 1 copy of my documents. And I'll give you an example. Here's a folder for a SAN security course on my desktop. Here's my documents with all my documents that I store stuff on in my documents on my Mac. So what I typically like to do is I don't want to have copies of that in the virtual machine as well on my Mac. I just want to have 1 copy. Say I don't double the space. I don't run into version issues. So I enabled shared folders, and then I add the folders that I want to get access to from the Mac. So I'm going to take my desktop is typically 1. So now inside the virtual machine, I'll be able to access these files on my desktop. I'll typically add the documents, so I can also get to the documents folder. I'll almost always add downloads. So if I download something in my Mac, I can get it from my Windows box. And then I don't add too much more beyond that. You could add folder after folder after folder. You can also add external drives. If they're plugged in at the moment, they'll show up. If you plug in a USB while you're running, it will prompt you, do you want to connect this to the Mac or to the Windows box? But these will show up every single time. I'm going to add one more. And this one I always add in case I forgot something. And I add the device hard drive itself. So the entire hard drive. So if it's not in one of these 3 folders and I still need to get to it, I can navigate here from the hard drive, which is like the C root, and get into that folder. One of the other features they give you down here is mirroring folders so that you can tell it to mirror the desktop of the Mac to the desktop of the Windows box So you don't have to do the shortcut. I personally don't like that because it gets confusing as to, is this shortcut really on my Mac, or is it really on my VM, or is it on both? So I don't use those myself. I do it this way. In addition, you got default applications. This is one I disable. If you don't disable it, when you double click a file in your Mac, it might decide the application to run that is in the virtual machine. Open VMware, launch the virtual machine, and launch the application automatically. If it's something you want, you can use these features. I do not. I work on the premise that if I want to be working my virtual machine, I'm going to boot it up and I'm going to launch the application. So other things, you have application menus. Typically, I don't modify this. Keyboard and mouse, I don't typically modify this. Processors, you might modify this. I might decide I want 4 gigs of RAM for this machine, not 2. It made the recommendation of 2. I got 16 on my Mac, so I certainly could go higher. But if I'm not putting any heavy hitters on this Windows machine, I don't really need to. But if I put Autodesk on here, I might double this 4096. So we'll leave it like that for now. My Mac has 8 processor cores, so I definitely wouldn't want to go to 4. I really probably never need to go above 2. And if you're not sure, just start with 1 and leave it go. Show all. I'm also going to go here and make sure the accelerate graphics are on. Now, with a Retina display Mac, what's going to happen is the first time you install VMware Tools into this operating system, and I'm going to show you that, it'll turn this feature on, use full Retina display. Now, a Retina display is a huge amount of pixels from left to right and top to bottom. So if this machine uses it and it's only this big, everything's going to be super tiny. So the minute it does that, the first thing I do is come back here and unclick this box. And I'll show you that because that's going to happen to us today. So I'll go back to show all. We'll go down to the next row. Network adapter. So the 2 things you're going to mainly do is either share with your Mac or auto detect bridge. If you auto detect bridge, which is what I'm going to do, that means it has its own connection to the network separate and segregate from my Mac. It will have its own MAC address. It will get its own IP address on the network, a real address. It will look on the network as though it was a real computer, a normal computer, an average computer. If you say share with my Mac, the only time I use this is, let's say I go to a client and their wireless restricts my machine to just the 1 NIC card and just 1 MAC address, and a second Mac won't connect. Well, I can hide this virtual machine behind my Mac, like a little firewall router, and I can now allow my virtual machine to get on the network without them knowing. It's kind of hiding behind my Mac, but this is the one I use most of the time because it operates like a real machine. So let's go back to show all. By the way, under network adapters, you can connect and disconnect with this checkbox, and that's the equivalent of unplugging and plugging it back in, the Ethernet cable. Let's see here, hard drive, we don't have to really touch this, but this is where it tells it the hard drive. If you change this to a bigger size, you cannot reduce this, but you can change it to a bigger size if you run out of disk space. However, you have to know how to then change the partition in the operating system to grow that space. Disk part for Windows or the disk utilities. There's an editor, live CD for Linux, so you have to know how to grow those. This won't do that for you, but it will make the disk appear bigger. We also have the CD-ROM. Now, we're going to set this one. So we have nothing selected for the CD-ROM right now. I am going to tell it, because we got to install Windows. If I don't do this, we'll get this machine boot up and look like a machine with no operating system. I'm going to choose a disk, actually, in fact, a disk image, or otherwise known as an ISO file. And I'm going to go to my desktop where I put it, and you'll see that Windows 10 DVD there. I'll select that. And I will tell it to be connected. So when I power it on, it will be connected, and I can boot off this and install the Windows operating system. Where did I get that DVD from? From Microsoft. I downloaded it from the MSDN subscription we have. You can take a CD-ROM and plug it in and connect this to a real CD-ROM device, or you can get ISOs from just about anywhere. If I go over to sound card, you can tell it to use the sound card. We'll leave that as is. USB, you can tell it to share USBs. Right now, I'm not particularly sharing any USBs. These are actually 2 different adapters I have in right now to be recording this audio. But I usually turn this one off so that my Bluetooth devices don't get connected into the VM. And by just leaving the screen like this, when you connect a USB into your Mac and your Windows virtual machine is running, it will prompt you. It will say, hey, where do you want me to connect this? Do you want me to connect this to the Mac? Or would you like me to make it connected to the Windows box? So you get that choice. Printer, I almost leave this as is, which it basically allows the Windows box to use my Mac printers. The camera, unless you're doing anything with camera, piece, says my Blue Man Group t-shirt. Unless you're doing something with cameras, usually I'll remove the camera here. So let's go ahead and take that out. It's not a wasted resource. If ever you want to add it back in, you can add a device here. That's how you add devices. So let me go back to the settings there. Startup disk, for this one, right now we're going to click CD-ROM because that's the next one we want to boot with. You don't have to really touch this too much. Most of the stuff is good as is. So we're ready to go. We got a Windows 10 machine here, a piece of hardware. We need to install an operating system to it. And to do that, we simply click the play button. It boots up like a real machine. I'm going to hide this library window so you don't see it. And this is running our CD. You can see it already booted to the CD for us. It's pretty quick. My machine's running a 2 terabyte solid state disk. So one thing I want to show you is before we go any further with this, I'm going to open my documents and go down to my virtual machines. And you'll see this Windows 10 box here. Let me open this up like this. So here's the Windows Utility 10 box we just made. And it looks like one file. It's actually a container. So if you right click and you say show contents, package contents, you can view what's inside of it. And what I want to do is I want to show you a couple things. First of all these files, okay? These virtual disk files. So what it does is we told it to make the drive 60 gigs, but obviously these are not taking 60 gig up because we didn't put anything on them yet. But as you add data, these will each get bigger and bigger and bigger. It breaks them up because a class 2 hypervisor runs on another operating system. So in this case, Fusion's running on the Mac. And we want to make sure the files don't get too big where the Mac can't handle them. The second thing to understand in here is out of these virtual disks, if you format the hard drive of the virtual machine, you're actually just formatting the insides of these files. You're not touching your Mac's hard drive. That's important to understand. And finally, we'll take a peek at one important file, which is the VMX. I'm going to right click and I'm going to open this with, let's go with our text editor, the Notepad. And you'll see in here that there's a lot of settings that define how the machine is built. For example, the display name, I typed that if you recall. Shared folders are true. What folders are being shared is on there. So this is the actual configuration of that virtual machine. And that's, if you ever ran a problem, you could always replicate this from another virtual machine, but that's what defines how this virtual machine has been built. So I don't play around in here too much, especially when the VM's on, so I'm going to close that window. And then we're going to run through the install of Windows. And I'm going to pause this video, obviously, to let it go, but it's already underway. So, and we have the install done now. Only had to answer a couple questions for the Windows 10 install, and it's up and running fairly quickly. So one thing we're going to want to do for this on almost every VM is install a tools called VMware Tools, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, I can drag and drop into the windows, and it does a whole bunch of other neat things like the sharing. You'll notice I don't have anything showing up here shared with my Mac. It's because we need to install those tools. So we go up under Virtual Machine, and there should be Install VMware Tools, and we'll say Install, and what it does is it takes the VMware Tools for Windows 10, it attaches it to this machine as though it was a CD-ROM or something, and you can see if I go to this PC, the VMware tool drive's there. I can double click it and run the install. So for the most part, even for memory management and proper CPU management and stuff, you're going to want the CD-ROM, you want the VMware tools installed on these devices. So usually it requires a reboot. So you want to do it early on this process. I'm going to cancel that. Whenever you're installing VMware Tools on a virtual machine, you always want to take the typical settings. Very rarely, only in troubleshooting, do you ever want to do custom or specific settings. Otherwise, you might end up with tools for Linux installed on a Windows platform and weird stuff like that. So this process is running, and I will wait for the window to pop up here. And there it is. And we just pretty much take the defaults. Like I said, you want typical. We run through the install, only takes a second, and then it's going to reboot you. Now watch what happens to my resolution. Because we have not set the resolution, it's going to assume we want to use the Retina level display, and everything here is going to get super tiny because the Retina display is capable of displaying so much more data. And there it goes. Almost unusable. So what I'll do is, while that's still installing, I will go back to my display settings and turn off that feature. And it will tell you need to reboot after doing that. So I just hit finish here, and I will let it restart. And your virtual machine is set up. I will pause this while it's restarting. Actually, it won't actually take that long. But you'll get an idea to see how this, the quickness of this reboot here, so I won't pause it. Now that still sees the CD-ROM connected. So it's asking me if I want to boot from it. So while that's booting, I'm going to modify that. We don't want the ISO left connected to this machine every time. So what you do is you just come into the gear, you go to your CD-ROM, and you uncheck that. It's almost like ejecting the CD in the old world where we actually used them. So now I have my installed machine. I'll click in the window to put focus there, and I'll put my password in there of password 1. Ooh, tricky. And you can see the screen looks nice. It's in a window. You see this, now that we have VMware Tools running, you'll see it appear down here eventually. You see this folder here, VMware shared folders. I double click it, and you'll see the folders that we did share. So in fact, if I go to this desktop, I should see this cheat sheets and this SANS folder there. If I double click that, you'll see that is my desktop on my Mac. So no need to keep data on this Windows box. I can access it all on the Mac from the Windows box. So that's really cool. So it looks like this is up and running, and I'll just double check my VMware Tools is running down here, so we're good. So one of the nice things VMware Tools gives us is if there is something we wanted to drag onto the desktop here, for example, let me drag this text file. You can see I can drag it and the plus sign appears, and I can just let it go. And now that's an actual copy, not looking at the real one. And I can open that up in here and have that document here. I can throw it away, empty my trash bin, and it's still here on my Mac. So drag and drop's a nice feature. There's 3 different views you can use as well. So what I'm going to do in order to illustrate these, I'm going to start Calculator in the Windows environment, okay? And I'm going to start, let's use Solitaire. Maybe not a good one. I don't know about Solitaire anymore. So let's use Internet Explorer. I'm going to open those 2 in here. And obviously, those 2 don't exist on the Mac. So a couple things we can do on the Mac is how we want to view this. This is called a single window. And if I go way up here to the menu in the Mac under View, it's under Single Window. We have 2 other options, full screen, which does exactly that. Let me go ahead and pop this into full screen. I get a full screen, it readjusts the resolution, and now I can use a control arrow to go back to my Mac. That was a control left arrow, control right arrow to go back to my Windows box, and I have 2 of them running at the same time. And you can see the apps running here. If you remember our network card, we set it to bridged, which means this should have its own MAC IP address, which it does, 144. It has its own MAC address, and we'll just remember the last 2 digits are CF. And then I'm going to shoot over to my Mac, and we're gonna take a look at that. And we'll do an IF config here for them. And you can see my MACs is 250.100. So it's definitely a different IP address. And my MAC address ends in 5A. So there's certainly different addresses between here and there. So what I'm going to try to do is ping 144 from my Mac. I should be able to do it. I should be able to ping from any network computer, really. Okay, caps lock's on. Hold on. 168, 250, 144. Now, it might not work if, in fact, the Windows, I'm going to leave that running, the Windows firewall's on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just to illustrate this is a real computer, I'm going to turn the firewall off. The minute I do that, I'm going to jump back to the Mac, and you can see it's now pinging that Windows box. So it is a real machine on the network, which is really cool. One last view I want to show you, so I'm going to close this down. We're going to leave these 3 applications running terminal, command line, CMD, Internet Explorer, and the Windows calculator. And I'm going to go to the 3rd and final view. So in full screen, if I leave my mouse at the top, VMware Fusion menu will pop down, and I can go into view, and I can go to what's called Unity. Now, Unity means I want to hide the desktop in the start menu, but I want the apps to be visible as though they were running on my Mac. So check this out. I go to Unity, that screen disappears, and there are my 3 apps. And they look like they're running, and you slide them around, you can see they do a little bit of goofy scaling. If you have one of those apps that you can see the background, you'll actually see the Windows background, not the Mac. But this allows me to work with them on my Mac as though they were local applications. If you want to open new ones, you find the VMware Fusion bar down here. You click and hold it, and you'll see my name of my VM and its start menu. And I can actually go into the start menu, and I can launch something else like Windows Paint or what have you. So I don't really like Unity. It gets very confusing as to what's on the Windows and what's on the Mac. So typically what I'll do is, to get back to it, I got to go back to VMware by highlighting this, go to the window of my Unity machine, and then without selecting one of those apps, I'm going to go back to single window. I usually leave mine in full screen, but for your demo today, I am going to leave it in single, and I'm going to close some of these applications down. Now, one last thing I want to show you as part of your demo is the ability to do snapshots. Now, you want to be careful with snapshots. Snapshots are not backups, and they're not meant to be kept for a long period of time. But let's say you were going to do something, okay, and you weren't sure it was going to work. You can go to snapshots, and you can say, take a snapshot right now called pre-upgrade. Actually, I'll just call this one clean 10, meaning a nice clean version of Windows 10, nothing installed on it. It takes a snapshot, and I can always revert to there. So if I was to go in here and, let's say, delete this file and empty the trash bin, you'd think it was gone. But I can actually go to snapshots and restore this. Now, when I restore this, it says, do you want to save the state you're in now where that file was deleted? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say restore to that state. I'm going to say don't save the current state. And it's going to pop right back to where it was there. If when you took the snapshot, the machine was running, it will be running. If you had 3 NIC cards on there, it will put the NIC cards back. It'll make the hardware the same. It'll make the file system the same, and it'll restore everything the way it was. I've actually done this demo and deleted the entire Windows directory and blew the machine up and was able to revert to this. And you can make multiple trees with snapshots and whatnot, but they're good ideas to do if you're going to be testing something. Like, say I'm going to test and install a VPN client. Well, that VPN client can hook into the operating system pretty deep. So what I'll do is take a snapshot before I do it, install it. If the install fails, I'll go back to the clean and I'll start it again. Allows me to test things over and over with a brand new, perfect, pristine copy. So snapshots are really cool. Finally, the last thing you need to know is how to shut the machine down, which is just like any other Windows machine. Follow the same procedure. End of the day, done working, shut it down. It is a real running operating system. It's not pretend. It's not a simulation. It's not a drawing or a display of it. It's actually a real running operating system that is sharing the hardware. So when you're down to this screen, you can close that window, and this is your library window, and you can see it appears here, and you can see whether it's running or not. You can see the consumption of hard disks and snapshots. So my hard disk is not very big, but my snapshot is taking the majority of that because we just took it. So in total, we're taking about 3 gigs of space. That can't be right now. This must need to be refreshed. Let me refresh this. Yeah, that's better. 10 gigs of space for the hard drive, 2 gigs for the snapshot, so that's 12 gigs, and a little bit of reclaimable. And I'll go ahead, and if we go to the settings, general, I can actually clean up the virtual machine and get this 300 meg back. Takes a second. The bit more space that you have to reclaim, the longer it takes. And we can close this and we're off on our way. You can also pause those machines if you don't have time to shut them down, or if my Mac was to go to sleep, it will pause those virtual machines. All right, that is your lesson on VMware Fusion. I hope that helps you understand how to use it. As a demonstration for the last piece here, I'm going to launch a Kali Linux virtual machine, restore it from backup, or from paused. I'm going to launch a Windows 7 machine, and I'm going to launch my Utilities 10 we just built. And I want to minimize my library window out of the way. So I've got 3 different machines actually actively running, including my Mac. And I want to show you something because they might each have 2 gigs of RAM or more. So when you look at this guy, he was given, for example, 2 gigs of RAM. This guy was given 8 gigs of RAM. So that's 10. And this guy was given 4. So that's 14 gigs of RAM. Plus my Mac has to run. And what I want you to do is take a look here at the memory pressure screen, where it's showing the actual memory used. So even though I have 14 gigs of RAM out of 16 allocated to virtual machines, which would only leave 2 for my Mac, we're actually only using 10 gigs out of my total 16 between all the things I'm doing and the Mac itself. And that's because VMware is most efficient at that. They really shine in the enterprise that way. So you can get away running a lot of things. Now, if you're going to do some AutoCAD or some heavy development in one of these windows, you wouldn't want to be running this many virtual machines, but hopefully that illustrates you the power of this product. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.